I need you to pay very close attention because what I'm about to share is something most people overlook every single year. And the reason they overlook it is because it looks normal. It looks like just another month, just another change in season, just another point in the calendar. But from the side I came from, April was never just a month. It was a window, a period of increased activity, a time when patterns were easier to reinforce, and when people who were unaware became more vulnerable without even realizing it. I wasn't always someone exposing these things. There was a time when I was deeply involved in the occult, trained to understand timing, patterns, and how certain periods carried more influence than others. And April was always marked, not because of superstition, but because of strategy. I remember being taught that people naturally become more distracted during certain times of the year. Their focus shifts, their routines change, their guard lowers slightly. And when that happens, subtle influence becomes easier, not through obvious attacks, but through small shifts, a sudden heaviness, unusual fatigue, increased confusion, unexpected tension in relationships, things that don't seem connected, but start happening around the same time. And most people dismiss it. They say, it's just stress, it's just life, it's just a phase. That's what we depended on, because if a person labels something as normal, they won't resist it. And if they don't resist it, it settles. I've seen people enter cycles in April that they carried for months, sometimes the rest of the year, not because something powerful happened, but because something subtle went unchallenged. That's why I'm speaking to you now, not to create fear, but to create awareness. Because once you understand what happens during this time, you don't respond the same way. You don't ignore small shifts. You don't dismiss sudden changes. You stay alert. And when you stay alert, you stay in control. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly what begins to shift during this period, what signs to watch for, so you don't mistake it for something normal ever again. Now that you understand April is not just another month, you need to recognize what actually begins to shift during this time. Because nothing starts big, everything starts small. When I was in the occult, we were never told to create obvious disruption first. That would alert people, that would cause resistance. Instead, the focus was always on introducing subtle changes, things that could easily be dismissed, because what goes unnoticed goes unchallenged. The first shift you need to watch for is mental fog and scattered thinking. You may notice it suddenly becomes harder to focus. Simple decisions feel heavier. Your thoughts feel disorganized, like you can't think clearly the way you normally do. This is not always about being tired, it's about distraction. Because once your mind is scattered, your awareness drops. And when awareness drops, everything else becomes easier to influence. The second shift is unusual emotional swings. You may feel fine one moment and then suddenly irritated, discouraged, or overwhelmed the next without a clear reason. Small things begin to feel bigger than they are. Situations that normally wouldn't affect you start to drain you. I remember being taught to target emotional stability during certain periods because emotions influence reactions, and reactions, when repeated, become patterns. The third shift is increased tension in relationships, misunderstandings, arguments that start over small things, distend where there was once peace. This is one of the most effective ways to create disruption because it doesn't look spiritual, it looks personal. And when people think it's just personality clashes or normal conflict, they stop guarding their responses. But the timing is not random. The fourth shift is sudden loss of motivation or energy. Things you were consistent with suddenly feel heavy. You delay what you were moving forward in. You feel tired, even when you shouldn't. And slowly, progress slows down. This was always a key strategy, because stopping someone at the beginning of the year is difficult, but slowing them down in the middle is much easier. Now listen carefully. None of these things by themselves seem extreme. That's what makes them dangerous, because when they happen together over a short period of time, they begin to create a pattern. And once a pattern forms, it becomes your new normal if you don't interrupt it. That's how cycles begin, not through one major event, but through multiple small shifts that go unchallenged. I've seen people go from clarity to confusion, from peace to tension, from progress to delay, all within a few weeks, simply because they didn't recognize what was happening. They adapted to it instead of resisting it. And that adaptation is where control is lost. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. What you recognize early, you can stop quickly. The moment you notice these shifts, you don't accept them, you don't adjust to them, you interrupt them. Because once you interrupt the pattern, it cannot grow. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you why April specifically becomes such a strategic time for these patterns, and what most people never realize about timing itself. Now, here is what most people never stop to consider: timing. Because in the realm I came from, timing was never random. It was studied, observed, used with precision. And April was always seen as a transition point, not just on a calendar, but in people. By the time April arrives, something has already happened internally for most individuals. The year has started, plans have been made, momentum has either begun or started to slow. And this creates a very specific condition, one that was always targeted. Let me explain. At the beginning of the year, people are alert, they are focused, they are intentional, there's energy, direction, and clarity. But by April, that initial focus begins to shift. Routine settles in, distractions increase, consistency weakens, sometimes just slightly. And that slight shift is enough, because when consistency drops even a little, awareness follows. And when awareness lowers, influence becomes easier. I remember being taught to never attack at the peak of someone's focus. Wait until the middle, wait until things feel normal again. Wait until discipline relaxes, because that is when resistance is lowest. And April often becomes that moment. It's not about the month itself, it's about the state people are in during that time: less guarded, less intentional, more reactive, more distracted. And that creates an opening. Now, here's something deeper. By April, patterns that started earlier in the year are easier to lock in. If someone has been consistent in positive movement, this is where resistance tries to slow them down. If someone has been inconsistent, this is where that inconsistency tries to become permanent. Either way, it's a point of reinforcement, a moment where direction becomes pattern and pattern becomes outcome. That's why small shifts during this time matter more than people realize, because they don't stay small, they build. I've seen it happen repeatedly. A little distraction turns into delay. Delay turns into frustration. Frustration turns into loss of focus. And by the time the person realizes what happened, they've already moved far off track. Not because something powerful hit them all at once, but because something subtle redirected them early. And that's the strategy: not always to stop you immediately, but to shift you slightly and let time do the rest. Now listen carefully. This is why awareness right now matters more than ever. Because if you stay consistent when others become distracted, if you stay focused when others relax, if you stay aware when others dismiss what's happening, then this window loses its effect completely. You don't get pulled into the pattern. You stay in control of your direction. And that changes everything. Because what was meant to slow you down becomes something you move through without impact. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how to respond during this time, what to do immediately when you notice these shifts, so nothing takes hold and nothing redirects your path. Now, this is the moment where everything becomes practical, because awareness alone is not enough. You can recognize the shift, you can understand the timing, you can even see the pattern forming, but if you don't respond immediately, it will still try to settle. And this is where most people make their mistake. They notice something feels off, but they delay their response. They say, I'll deal with it later. I just need rest. It will pass. That delay is where the pattern begins to take hold. When I was in the occult, we relied on that delay because the longer something sits unchallenged, the more normal it feels. And once it feels normal, it becomes part of the person's routine. So the key is this: you must interrupt it immediately, not later, not when it gets worse, the moment you notice it. Let me show you exactly how. The first step is recognition with clarity. The moment you feel that shift, mental fog, emotional heaviness, sudden distraction, you say it clearly. This is not normal for me. That statement is important because it stops you from adapting to it. It keeps you aware that something has changed and that it needs to be addressed. The second step is refusal to align. You don't accept the feeling. You don't sit in the confusion. You don't entertain the distraction. You say, I do not accept this shift. I stay clear. I stay focused. This is where many people fail because they feel it and they assume they have to go through it. But you don't. Feeling something does not mean you have to agree with it. The third step is immediate realignment. You take a small, direct action that pulls you back into control. If your mind feels scattered, pause and refocus on one clear task. If you feel emotional pressure, step back and reset your state. If distraction tries to pull you away, bring your attention back intentionally. This is critical because action breaks momentum. The longer you sit in the shift, the stronger it feels. But when you act immediately, you disrupt it before it builds. Now listen carefully. You don't need something complicated here. You don't need long processes or deep analysis. You need speed, simple, direct, immediate, because the earlier you interrupt it, the easier it is to stop. And here's something powerful you need to remember. You are not trying to fight something big. You are stopping something small from becoming big. That's the difference. Most people try to deal with things after they've already grown, but you are learning to shut it down at the beginning. That's why this works. Now you notice the shift and you respond instantly. No delay, no adjustment, no acceptance, just immediate interruption. What happens? The pattern doesn't form, the cycle doesn't begin, the direction doesn't change. You stay exactly where you need to be, focused, clear, in control. And over time, this becomes natural. You don't even think about it, you just respond. And when you respond like that consistently, nothing gets the chance to take hold. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you how to maintain this level of control daily so that not just April, but any time of the year, you remain steady and unaffected, no matter what tries to shift around you. Now, this is where everything becomes lasting, because it's one thing to respond once, but it's another thing to remain steady over time. And this is exactly where most people lose ground. not in one moment, but in consistency. When I was in the occult, we understood something very clearly. If a person stayed consistent, they became difficult to influence. But if their awareness dropped even slightly, over time, that's when patterns could slowly re enter. And April was often just the beginning. If someone didn't guard themselves during this period, what started as something small could stretch into weeks, even months. That's why this next step is critical. You must build a daily state of awareness and control, not out of fear, but out of intention. Let me make this simple and practical for you. The first thing you must maintain is mental clarity. Start your day with focus, not distraction. Before you allow anything external to influence you, take a moment to center your thoughts. Set a clear direction for your day, because the way you begin often determines how you respond. If your mind starts scattered, it becomes easier for everything else to pull you further off track. But if you start clear, you stay clear. The second thing is emotional stability, not the absence of emotion, but control over it. You will still feel things. You will still experience moments of pressure. But the difference now is you don't let those emotions control your response. You observe them, you manage them, you don't align with them automatically. Because once you stop reacting emotionally, you stop feeding the pattern. The third thing is intentional focus. Distraction is one of the biggest tools used during this time. Not always something obvious. Sometimes it's just losing track of what matters, shifting attention from what you should be doing to what doesn't move you forward. That's why you must stay intentional. Now, what you're doing, now, why you're doing it, and return to it quickly if something pulls you away, because focus keeps you grounded. Now, here's something very important you need to understand. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be consistent. If you notice yourself slipping, you don't ignore it, you don't wait, you correct it immediately. That correction is what keeps you steady. I've seen people lose weeks simply because they ignored small shifts, thinking they would fix themselves. But small shifts don't correct themselves, they expand unless you interrupt them. That's why your awareness must remain active, not intense, not stressful, but present. You're not looking for problems everywhere. You're simply not ignoring what you notice. And that alone keeps you ahead. Now imagine this. You move through this period with clarity, with control, with consistency. While others are distracted, you stay focused. While others adapt to shifts, you interrupt them. While others slow down, you keep moving. That's the difference. Because what was meant to affect you no longer has access. And over time, this doesn't just protect you for April, it strengthens you for everything that comes after. Because once you learn to stay steady in a time of potential disruption, you can stay steady at any time. And in the next chapter, I'm going to give you something final, something you can use daily to lock this in completely, so nothing pulls you out of alignment again. Now, this is the final piece, the part that turns everything you've learned into something stable, something unshakable, because awareness can fade, focus can drift, and consistency, if not reinforced, can weaken over time. That's why you need something that brings you back quickly, clearly, and consistently, a daily declaration. Not something long or complicated, but something direct, something that aligns your mind before anything else tries to. When I left that life, I realized that people don't lose control all at once. They lose it gradually through small moments of misalignment that go unchecked. And the easiest way to prevent that is to reset yourself daily before the day begins to influence you. You set your position. So I'm going to give you something you can use every single day. Especially during this time, say this with intention. I remain clear. I remain focused. I remain in control of my thoughts and my direction. No distraction, no confusion, and no sudden shift will move me off course. I do not accept anything that does not align with clarity, peace, and forward movement. I stay aware. I stay consistent. I stay grounded in what I know is right for me. Nothing will slow me down. Nothing will redirect me. Nothing will take me out of alignment. Now listen carefully. This is not just about repeating words. This is about setting your internal state. Because once your state is set, everything that doesn't match it becomes easier to recognize and reject. You don't have to figure things out in the moment. You've already decided where you stand. That's what makes this powerful. Now imagine this. You start your day like this, before distractions, before conversations, before pressure. Your mind is already aligned. So when something tries to shift you, it doesn't land the same way. You feel it, but you don't accept it. You notice it, but you don't adjust to it. You stay where you are. And that's the key, because most people adjust too quickly. They feel something and they move with it. But you're not doing that anymore. You're choosing your alignment first, and everything else has to match it. Now, here's the final truth I want you to carry with you. This is not about April anymore. This is about how you live every day. Because once you build this level of awareness, control, and consistency, no season, no moment, no shift can take you off course. You don't just react to what happens, you remain steady regardless of what happens. And that changes everything. Because now you're not affected by timing, you're not influenced by subtle shifts, you're not pulled into patterns you didn't choose. You are in control completely. And once you live from that place, nothing gets in, nothing takes hold, and nothing moves you away from where you're meant to go. Before this message ends, I need to leave you with one final warning, not to create fear, but to make sure you don't ignore what you now understand. Because once you're aware, you are responsible for how you respond. You now know that certain shifts can happen during this time. You know how subtle they are. You know how quickly they can form patterns if left unchallenged. So, the real question is this: what will you do with this awareness? Because I've seen both outcomes. I've seen people hear something like this, feel motivated for a moment, and then go back to living the same way, unaware, unguarded, reactive, and slowly, without even realizing it, they begin to adapt to the same patterns. They feel the shift, but ignore it. They notice distraction, but allow it. They experience delay, but don't correct it. And by the time they look back, weeks have passed, momentum is gone, focus is broken, direct has changed. Not because something powerful happened, but because something small was allowed to stay. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen people take this seriously. People who decided, not this time. People who stayed aware when others became distracted. Who responded immediately when something felt off. Who refused to adapt to anything that didn't align with where they were going. And the difference was clear. While others slowed down, they kept moving. While others lost focus, they stayed sharp. While others drifted, they stayed in control. And by the end of that same period, their results were completely different. That's what awareness does when it's applied. Now listen carefully. This is not about fighting something all month. This is about not giving anything permission to take hold. You don't need to be tense. You don't need to be stressed. You just need to remain aware and respond when necessary. That's it. Because control is not about effort, it's about alignment. And once your alignment is set, everything else becomes easier. So don't let this month pass like any other. Don't ignore small shifts. Don't delay your response. Don't allow patterns to form that you didn't choose. Stay present. Stay consistent. Stay in control. Because the truth is, this month does not have the power to define you, but your response to it does. So make that response intentional, make it immediate, make it consistent, and you will move through this time without losing anything, without being slowed down, without being redirected, because nothing was allowed to take hold. And that is the difference between being affected and staying completely in control. Now that we are at the end of this message, I need you to understand something very clearly. What you've learned here is not just for 1 month. It was never meant to be limited to a season, a period, or a moment in time, because life doesn't only shift in April, life shifts constantly. And if you only become aware during one specific time, you will miss the patterns that try to appear in other moments. That's why this final chapter is about continuity. Because the real goal is not just to survive a difficult period, it's to become someone who stays steady no matter what period they are in. When I was in the occult, the people who were considered easy to influence were not weak people. They were inconsistent people. People who were aware sometimes, but unaware most of the time. People who reacted strongly in one moment, but ignored small signs in another. And that inconsistency was all that was needed, because influence doesn't require full access. It only requires moments of openness. But the opposite is also true. Consistency closes those moments. So now that you've reached this point, your focus must shift from watching a season to building a lifestyle of awareness, a lifestyle of clarity, a lifestyle of steady response. Let me make this simple. What you practiced here, recognizing shifts, refusing alignment, responding immediately, doesn't stop now. It becomes your default way of living, not something you turn on, but something you already are. Because once your response becomes automatic, you don't need to prepare for every situation. You're already ready. You don't need to overthink every shift. You already recognize it. You don't need long recovery from distractions. You return quickly, and that changes everything. Now listen carefully. You are not leaving this message the same person who started it, because awareness changes behavior, and behavior repeated becomes identity. So if you take this seriously, you will notice something over time. Things that once affected you no longer do. Things that once slowed you down lose their impact. Things that once felt heavy no longer feel the same, not because the world changed, but because you did. So, as you move forward from here, remember this: you don't need perfect conditions, you need consistent awareness. You don't need to control everything around you. You only need to control your response, and you don't need to fear shifts, changes, or timing. You just need to stay grounded in what you already know works. Because once you reach that level, nothing external has the power to define your direction anymore. Only your awareness, only your response, only your consistency. And that is how you don't just get through a season, you rise above it completely.